Hi, this is Paul. I'm in the backyard, and you'll hear the mockingbirds go all morning. On the way on my flight back to Sacramento Saturday night, I was listening to Node in the Network, Node's commentary on Owen Benjamin's emotional reaction to Jordan Peterson's tweet. By this point, most of you will know that Jordan Peterson tweeted his opinion that Brett Kavanaugh should perhaps step down after being confirmed and put on the high court, and this would, in a way, heal the nation. And Owen Benjamin put out a pretty strong reaction in which there was a lot of, Note in the Network. I'll put the link to his video, and I thought he made a number of good points on the video, especially about religion. And one of the pieces that really caught my attention when I was going through the first time I was listening to Peterson's biblical series was that he mentioned that one of the things that happens in the Old Testament, and then the church picks up on it during the Roman Empire, is that the king is never the king is always beneath something. The king is answerable to the god, and you find this in ancient Near East countries. You find, I was at that point when I was listening to the biblical series, I was going through the book of Kings in my preaching on Sunday morning, and that was a really helpful point to make. And then once Peterson made it, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And you see again and again the need to have your final judge in the eternal, not in the present. And so Owen Benjamin was really struggling in this video about, he's cursing at Jordan Peterson and he's upset by him. And so I decided this morning, well, there's the airplane. I decided this morning that's a corporate jet. It'll only go by once, and it's going somewhere, unlike the hobby aircraft that circle and circle. And I decided this morning to go over to Owen's page and see, because I imagined, just as a pastor, someone has an immediate emotional reaction to something, and that's one take. Usually after a day or two, they'll settle down, and as Alan Jacobs mentions in his wonderful book, How to Think, a few days later, you'll start to marinate on things. And so I was curious what marinating Benjamin has done. And I don't listen to Benjamin hardly at all. I've listened to a couple of his videos. Seems like a real sweet, interesting guy. I like the shtick with the piano, and I like his transparency and honesty. And so this is some of what he had to say a couple days later.
He's lied a lot, Jordan Peterson. It's one reason I haven't been just boosting him up for a while. Like when he said he didn't sleep for 30 straight days, the world record is 10. And at that point, the people they went insane. So that's a lie. Okay, whatever. I've fibbed in my life, he with no sin, all that good stuff. When he said that he rewrote every one of his lines of every one of his books 30 times to get it perfect, that's a lie. No writer would ever do that. That makes no sense. That's insane.
Now, what's interesting here is if as many of you have, if you listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson, you know what he has to say about betrayal. And what Benjamin sounds like here is a man who's been betrayed, because he's kind of going back over his past experience with Peterson, and in a sense he's saying, hey, when you were lying, I shut up for you, I covered for you. Benjamin just has a real sense of betrayal here.
His only meat diet, where he said if he had one sip of vinegar, he lost his mind. I was such a fan of the guy that I even tried the only meat diet. That's how silly I am. It's not healthy and ridiculous. He's pro-universal income. That's socialism. Okay, you've never heard me bitch about any of this stuff. He's been systematically saying stuff that I've disagreed with over and over again.
And of course, to call Peterson a liar is a particularly damning charge, because one of the hallmarks of Peterson's identity in this conversation is that he's a truth teller, and one of his rules is tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And part of the reason he says he doesn't go to church is because of the lying pastors. And so for Benjamin to charge him with lying is about the worst thing you can charge Peterson with.
When he said Judge Kavanaugh, and I'll break down exactly what happened with the tweets so there's no confusion. When he said that, that's fundamentally against what everything he believes in. Someone in the comment section said, you got to separate the art from the artist. Not when the art is this. His art is speaking truth in times of cowardice. His art is not taking a knee to a leftist mob. His art.
Now, you can save the comments on the lip sync issues with this video, because in this clip I'm playing from Benjamin, the sync is off.
Art is embracing the uncomfort that free speech will allow. You know, his art is playing by the rules and taking a loss so that you get invited back to the game. Like, I'm such a Jordan Peterson fan that I'm doing what he taught. And so him saying that if Judge Kavanaugh should be confirmed.
Now pay attention here as we get into the now and the eternal, or the now and the ideal in this video. The differentiation between Peterson is a hypocrite. He doesn't practice what he preaches. And so in a sense, Benjamin here is saying, hey, I'm the true disciple. I'm holding to the vision. But now I'm not trying to make a personal comparison between Peterson and Benjamin. And so if you want to say, oh, Peterson's true and Benjamin's wrong, just set all that aside. That's all part of human community and negotiating relationships. The issue here is that Benjamin implicitly sets the teaching into the eternal, into the realm of the ideal. And in that sense, Benjamin is saying, I am the true disciple of the sacred teaching.
Confirmed, he should step down. And then people are like, oh, it's only a little tweet, just 6 words. I'm like, no, he followed it up with an explanation that was just as insane. And that's so fundamental. That would be as if you found out that when I'm on the road, I'm having sex with strange women, or I beat my kids. You know, like, there would be things.
Now, notice again how morality comes into play here, okay? And this is common morality, where you're looking for a character who has integrity, whose life matches the. Now, if I say sacred message or sacred teaching, part of the difficulty in our culture is that is supposed to be sarcastic. Hang on, I knew my dog when I went out here would be like, "Oh, you're outside. You got to let me outside."
And I pray of you, dear listener, that if I go off the deep end like that, if I become corrupted, if I am made into a hypocrite, not make mistakes, I do every day. I'm about to address a few more. But if I go that hard against what I believe in and what I'm talking about, by all means, bail.
Okay, so again, this is religious language, because there's a sacred teaching. And again, as I was saying, you almost can't use that word in our contemporary context, because it sounds like I'm being sarcastic. But I'm not being sarcastic, because what he's saying in here is that there is the truth, and the truth is above us. And if I fail to live up to the truth, I am not going to leverage the relational level with you to stay loyal to me. And you have every right. So what we need to be accountable to each other to, at great personal cost, is this truth, and the truth is above the now. Again, this is all religious language.
I'm just a man. Someone commented a great biblical passage.
Okay, I'm just a man. Now pay attention to the betrayal the betrayal he feels from Jordan Peterson. And we're going to get into the question of men and idols and gods and idols. And so he's saying, hey, I'm just a man, but implicitly Peterson, and our hearts do this, John Calvin says, our hearts are idol factories. We make idols in them, and we don't even know we make them. We often don't know we make them until we feel a sense of betrayal.
Where is it? Isaiah, stop trusting in mere humans who have but a breath in their nostrils. It's so true. It's like, and one criticism that someone said of me was profound, because a lot of people were saying stuff that's nonsense. It was almost like when I did that Anthony Bourdain video, and I just was getting lambasted. I saw some of my Patreons bail. It was the first time in a while that my Instagram followers actually ticked down, but that's fine. That's a good sign. That means that I'm not clamoring for money or approval.
Okay, so now he's contrasting the now and the eternal, or the now and the ideal again, and he's trying to be a disciple of the true path, and he understands that being a disciple of the true path will mean that there are costs and there are sacrifices.
That's fine. But every now and then someone will say something and I'm like, whoa. Oh, first off, Mary says, did you know Jordan was accused of some inappropriate behavior by a female student a few years ago? He was exonerated. That makes his latest tweets about Kavanaugh so mystifying. I can't verify that, but that sounds about right.
I've heard the same, and Peterson has talked about it, so that's correct.
Okay, this dude, this sounds insulting, but it's not, because I think it might be kind of true, and truth is never insulting. So, all right, this guy says, from my perspective, this is a recurring cycle in Owen's life. He has mentioned that he had problems with his own father in his childhood, fear of abandonment, and fear of being let down by someone he looks up to, a strong man. Owen has unrealistic expectations of men he looks up to, like Jordan Peterson and previously Joe Rogan. He felt he could trust them, and when they let him down, he must turn against them fully to protect his own feelings of being let down by a man he felt he could trust, like his father. The anger he unleashes on strong men who let him down is the defensive mechanism that he isn't even aware of from his childhood trauma. P.S. I could be 100% wrong, and I'm still a fan of what he does. That's one. I don't know if that's right or not. I have to really think about that. But that was fairly mind-blowing. And it's something for me to really, really think about. Because sometimes...
I appreciate both that comment, because these psychodynamics are true, and as a pastor you see them operating in people sometimes, and the thing about these kinds of psychodynamics is we can't see them in ourselves, which is why we need a community around us. But I really appreciate Owen Benjamin's ability to listen to that and consider it. That's a mark of maturity, because again, instinctively we get reactive and defensive, and we say, no, that's not true of me. Jordan Peterson is a fake and a hypocrite and a horrible man, and I'll never say anything good about him again. He's really helped me, but I'm putting him into my past, and all of this kind of stuff. And Benjamin doesn't go there. I think that's about it with this.
I don't know. Maybe it is a defensive mechanism. I think sometimes, like, my dad, I love my dad. And
again, the person who made the comment and admitted to the fact of it, that, you can't really psychoanalyze someone through the thin tube of YouTube and really know anything. You're looking at a persona. You're looking at a flat image, a very selective take on a person's life.
All humans are flawed, and
Now we're getting into religious language. This is religious dogma. When he says all humans are flawed, this is the horrible dogma that Sam Harris wants to banish from our consciousness. But the reason we have dogmas is because we need them. And when we say all humans are flawed, this is an important dogma that we use. Now, is this a self-defense dogma where we say, this is going to buffer my emotional shock and pain when someone betrays me? But no, it's true dogma.
My dad kept me alive and didn't abandon and all that stuff. But I don't know how else to put this. He's a very effeminate man.
And then he goes into his father, which is beyond the point of this video. So I thought it was interesting where Benjamin goes and what he does, and yeah, very interesting. And that got me into a little bit about idols and gods, because we set up idols, and idols grow in our hearts sometimes when we don't feel them growing. And to me, this gets into the third commandment: you shall make no graven image, which of anything, you will not represent God in anything found in creation. That's the heart of the commandment. And And the Bible was unique in this. All the surrounding nations represented their gods and idols. And if you go to Google, I was doing a sermon a number of years back on whether you should put Buddha in the bathroom, and you can find that on my blog. But then I found a very interesting website where some Hindus talk about how idols are helpful and how idols help us imagine God and connect our hearts to God and get an emotional attachment and all of that. But within the third commandment, or second commandment, I am the Lord. There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of debate on the numbering of the commands. There's kind of a Jewish numbering and a Christian. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a graven image of anything in the heavens above or the earth beneath. So in other words, no representations of God in image. And again, this gets back to Jordan Peterson's. You always locate the top of your hierarchy above any given man. This gets instantiated in the U.S. system, where we have this saying, and again, these aphorisms encode dogmas. No one is above the law, which means whether you're president of the United States or whether you're a convict in prison because you have molested and murdered children, which is about the worst, one of the worst things you can do in our imagined sin hierarchy today. The law deals with all of you. But this then, of course, gets into Jesus, because Jesus is the perfect man. And you say, but Jesus is a man. Not was, is, because of the resurrection. That's how Christians talk. And then people would say, well, that's why I can't believe Jesus was perfect. Well, what's difficult to understand are the roles we need Jesus to play and what we need Jesus to do. And I'm not, by saying this, denying that Jesus was the perfect man. What do we mean by him being perfect or without sin? He sits at the top of the hierarchy, and Peterson has this right. Now, and if you look at Christians, even though Christians often in American evangelicalism have a bad habit of setting up biblical characters as heroes, one of the really amazing things about the Bible is that there are very, very few heroes in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. Almost all of the Old Testament saints are portrayed as deeply flawed individuals. And in the New Testament, Stephen, there's a little bit of heroism going on in the book of Acts with Stephen in the way he's portrayed. But Jesus is really the only hero in the Bible. He's the only one shown to have no sin. Now, of course, Sam Harris will say, well, but if you go back and if you could watch him and you're only seeing a selected text, blah, 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 and put all that aside. The question really gets magnified when you get to Matthew 28 at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus gathers with his 11 disciples and they worship him and some doubted. And that's just an amazing, amazing text where on one hand you have all of these men who were raised as Jews. Polytheism, idol worship had culturally been beaten out of that culture for hundreds of years, and it's what made the Jews so alarmingly distinct in the ancient pagan world and in the Roman Empire. How they were absolutely so determined. You would, if you tried to set up an idol in the temple, you would do so literally over the dead bodies of the nations, because they would give their lives to protect that commandment. It was that zealotry. So if you read N.T. Wright's book on the Apostle Paul, N.T. Wright goes into a lot of this idea of zealotry and in a sense the Elijah spirit that was very much at play in Second Temple Judaism during the time of Jesus' ministry on earth. And Jesus is worshipped. And so right away you get the sense of what is happening here. Now, a Christian would say that it doesn't matter how wonderful you think the preacher is or how wonderful you think your hero is. Maybe your hero is Augustine or John Calvin or Thomas Aquinas or St. Francis or Pope Francis or it doesn't matter. Christian dogma says, just as Owen Benjamin had said, all men are flawed. All of us are sinners. Calvinist dogma, you have this doctrine of total depravity, which essentially says everything we do is tainted by sin, and we are all blinded by sin. We are crippled by sin. We are not as blind as we could be. We are not as crippled as we could be, but everything is contaminated. Everything misses the mark. We don't arrive at perfection. What happens if that is the only dogma you have, however, and if you don't have that which is perfect, that which is ideal? See, the problem with idols is that they're down here with us. And the difference between idols and gods is that the God, at least the Christian God, is beyond that. So now, what's interesting, so a couple more clips I wanted to play. I also listened to Rebel Wisdoms, to David's good interview. I thought it was a really good interview with Douglas Murray, and I really appreciate that Douglas Murray would do the interview. He seemed pretty relaxed, but he gave a number of the impressions and the pieces that we expect him to give. But here again, what we're seeing is that we imagine in the secular space, and if you listened at least to the language game being played by Harris and Dillahunty, that religion is a bad thing, it ought to be done away with. My definition of religion is something that we will never do away with, which is actually, again, much closer to Peterson's definition.
And I think that is a version of what I'm...
And yeah, the sound is not...
when I say that
the sound is not equal here.
We may be discovering that the only thing worse than religion is its absence, is that the people seem to be finding it extremely hard. And I don't absolve myself from this, by the way. I'm not saying that I sit in some unique position where I don't suffer from this. I think we all do to some extent. But I think people are finding it very hard to know what it is you do hold on to, what you can hold on to.
Now pay attention as he talks, again, to the same dynamics I pointed out in the Owen Benjamin video, where you have the now and the eternal, or the now and the ideal, and what Douglas Murray will go into is the fact that in the now we need the ideal. Without the ideal, and in fact the hope of ideal, and in fact, and this is something again that Christianity offers, the hope that with our story, Christianity calls this our soul. With our story, we will realize the ideal. We will see the ideal. We will see justice.
To put it another way, fixed certainties. Now, religion, among many other things, provides people, erroneously we may think, but with fixed certainties.
See, again, those fixed certainties are the ideal.
For instance, the biggest of which is some kind of cosmic idea of justice, and a watered-down version of which we imbibe in our societies today. What is it that the rug on the floor of the Oval Office said? The arc of human history is long, but it tends towards justice.
He said this, and it caught my imagination, because I thought I knew this was one of Obama's favorite sayings, and apparently he had it woven into the rug, which I found interesting. And there's a good article in the Daily Beast by Matt Lewis. Let's see if PowerPoint will do me right now. Maybe it won't. Better pause. And again, sorry for I don't edit my videos, which means that if the sound levels are different on different websites, they will be louder or softer. If I went through and did my videos differently, not using just a simple video capture software, which I do just so that I can do these things quickly and I have time to do them, I could smooth out the sound levels in them all. But this article I think was really quite good, and the author references Michael Wear. Michael Wear, if you look him up, W-E-A-R, worked for the Obama administration and has written about this. And he worked on the faith initiatives, which was something that the Bush administration had started. But one of the things he recognizes about Obama's use of this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. is that this really only works, this idea that the arc of history bends towards justice, well, why? What makes that happen? Well, Martin Luther King Jr. was trained at the height of neo-orthodoxy. And if you go over to Node in the Network's channel and you listen to what he's going to say about Bart, neo-orthodoxy was a particular theological movement that tried to undo some of liberalism, some of theological liberalism that had really taken hold at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, and recapture a lot of what Orthodox Christian faith could recapture. And Karl Barth was an important figure in that neo-orthodoxy. And Dr. King was very much a neo-orthodox theologian. He had his doctorate in theology, and he went. These were the theologians of his day, and so right there you have the question. Well, what bends that arc? Well, this again gets into some of the issues I talked about in my last video, where Nazi ideology, which is a progressivist ideology, imagined that the arc of history is bent towards racial perfectionism and purity. That's Nazi ideology. Communist ideology imagined that the arc of history is bent towards material, economic, and social equality. Now, the arc of history bends towards justice. A lot of that depends on how you define justice and where that goes. Now, the question is, when we get into the Sam Harris conversations about agency, God number 2, is God an agent? Well, the question is, if you hold a progressivist ideology, what is the agent that yields the effects that your ideology, your ideological certainty is grounded upon? And Marx follows Hegel in that you have, in a sense, an impersonal agent in history that brings it. Let's say, imagine something like gravity as an impersonal agent. And so somehow history will be arced towards justice. This could actually bring up Matt Dillahunty's complaint what if God is the devil, which is the question of, well, is it just all arbitrary? Well, this same idea has the same kind of weakness in that, well, is the arc of history basically just the cold death of the universe? Because if you're living in a materialist world, that's what you're struggling with. So it's a very interesting quote, and it's very interesting that Obama apparently had this woven into the rug that is in the Oval Office. Now I want to go back to where we were at with Douglas Murray.
There's not a lot of evidence for that rug being true, but it's a wonderful idea and probably hard to live entirely without. Religion provides, among other things, that idea. It gives you the idea that if not now, then in a future world, you will see justice.
In a future world, you will see justice, meaning, again, the Christian assertion of this thing called the soul, and that your consciousness, your story, will be translated into that new world. And again, this is within Christian language, with my eyes will I see him. Now, when we say that as Christians, we don't necessarily mean with these literal eyes, but what we're saying is that with our new bodies, with our soul, we will see him. We will see justice. This is all the same thing. Or the same, but this is all related.
And it's a wonderful idea. And there are many smaller concepts which religion probably alone can provide, which without it people struggle.
Okay, so the now and the eternal. Without it, people struggle. And so in a sense, what Owen Benjamin is struggling with when with this tweet, Jordan Peterson kicked over in Owen Benjamin's head the Jordan Peterson idol that Owen Benjamin had constructed in himself, that he might not have even known. Well, now he knows it because of this sense of betrayal.
One obvious example being one that obsesses me is how do you actually believe, not just get told to follow through on, or at least, but how do you actually believe in the concept of the sanctity of human life? I'm not trying to get onto abortion or anything on this, but how do you believe in the sanctity of human life as we live it in the absence of religion? Well, we have a version of it in human rights, which is a sort of a non-religious attempt to enshrine a religious idea. But
I wouldn't say it's a non-religious attempt. I'd say it's an attempt to be non-religious.
Filled with trouble. And there's, as I say, there in that concept is a very, very deep and important thing to hold on to. God knows we need to hold on to it. But you can see how even that slips at the margins, it slips at the edges.
And that's, of course, where you get into abortion. And there's some people that, so why hasn't the needle really moved in the American public on abortion? That was supposed to be, again, one of these progressivist issues that by pick some year in the future, by 2020 or 2040, everyone would be okay with abortion. That's what the contemporary ideology, the progressive liberationism, or as N.T. Wright calls the progressive Epicureanism would imagine, but it doesn't move. Why? Because we have a sense that, well, this is at the edges of our grasp of, Jordan Peterson calls it the divine spark, but it's the imago Dei. It's the idea that we imagine human life as sacred, so therefore we bear the costs. That's the sacrifice. We bear the costs of birthing children with birth defects. And as a society, we bear those costs together through things like Social Security. And we bear the costs of not ending life prematurely at the end. And we bear those costs as a society, again, through Social Security. All of this stuff is connected.
And in the absence of that, if we are, as I think we obviously are, meaning-seeking beings, whether or not there is meaning, and I think the second bit I'll park for the time being, but if we are indeed meaning-seeking beings, then we will keep coming up with religions. And I think that's what's happening at the moment, broadly speaking, in the culture, is that our news is filled with religious urges and religious stories, and a newly emerging priesthood with a newly emerging set of commandments and a newly emerging set of blasphemies.
He's just enjoying this part of the conversation too much.
Heresies and punishments and shamings and floggings.
There's another point later in this video when he looks at David and he basically says, "This would be a wonderful time to have someone invent a new religion, don't you think?"
And
all on social media.
Some on social media and some in the real world. I mean, I'm always struck by the number of people who say to me, well, things that you are able to say and think about and write about and so on, if I said it in my job, I'd probably lose it. And that's one of the, and of course we can all name people who that has happened with. That's one of the things, isn't it? It means that almost anything can be pushed. It's an obvious, perhaps it's too much.
And again, once you lose the ideal, once you lose the eternal, anything in the now can be pushed and promoted. And this is one of the geniuses of Freud's assertion of what religion is. It's what we project into the sky. But then at some point you're going to have to look, as Charles Taylor did, and say, yeah, but is Christianity really just wish fulfillment?
It's very cliche to say, but it's in a very short period of time, it's become really quite hard to tell what's satire and what's real in our world. They keep on getting clogged up or mixed up together. You notice they seem to dance together. And sometimes it's revealed that the satire is real, and sometimes it emerges that the real is satire. And I think this leads to enormous discombobulation. And yes, there is a very clear, as I see it, religious impulse throbbing through our society today, creating a new religion. By the way, I just preferred the old ones.
Murray cracks me up. There's just a lot of religion smuggling. Now, this is one of my favorite videos, and if you go to my Twitter stream, you'll find that I keep it pinned right at the top because, obviously, because of my own personal history, the conversations about black and white racism are important to me, and this little speech that John McWhorter gives is just a classic example. Now, McWhorter is an atheist, and he goes on meaningoflife.tv with Robert Wright, and both he and Lowry both have a lovely video with Robert Wright that are worth seeing, where both of them talk about their experiences. Neither of them are practicing Christians right now. For a while, Lowry was. McWhorter isn't at all. He's an atheist. Lowry is at this point more of a skeptic, kind of a saddened skeptic who wishes it was true. But I think here McWhorter's analysis of what has happened, how we take anything that feels religion and turn it into a religion and try and make it into a religion, where that goes, and how the race conversation has gone there. And again, I think this portion is just genius.
Past it, and it's based on really just two things. It's not complex. It's actually rather simple. It's two log jams that make it impossible to have an honest conversation about race in this country right now. And I've decided to sit out.
Now let me make a comment about the honest part. And this is something that many people who've been burned by religion or are religious skeptics point out, that a hallmark of religion is often dishonesty. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, we're saying things we don't believe. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, if you go into a 12-step program, you'll hear an aphorism like fake it till you make it. Well, what we're trying to do sometimes with religion is to believe into something that isn't quite true yet right now. And so there's a sense in which that dishonesty is an aspirational dishonesty. It'd be like saying, well, I'm the best basketball player in the world. Well, we know you're not, but you want to be. And so in a sense, you're using that phrase to get there. At other times, it's the dishonesty, the lying, and again, this goes back to the Owen Benjamin thing. The lying is an attempt to cover up ourselves and an attempt to be disingenuous. That's the real meaning of lying.
The debate for about 5 years until fashions change. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm talking around the fact that, as Glenn was referring to, the idea that freshmen are now given Ta-Nehisi Coates' book to read, to me, basically just stops the race debate in its tracks. If it's going to be like that, then I'm not in it until some time passes. This is what I mean. There are two problems. One is a white problem. One is a black problem. I'm going to do the white one first. It has become a matter of religious faith among educated white people in America to feel a sense of atonement for being racist. When I say that it's religious, I don't mean that.
Now pay attention to feel a sense of atonement, because this week, hopefully, I'll start running through the abolition of man. But right away, as I put in the teaser, there's this question of feeling atonement versus being atoned for. And the feeling versus the truth is also a dynamic of the now and the ideal, or the now and the eternal.
As a kind of trash talk. I don't mean that as a way of getting attention. I mean that it has become a matter of what any anthropologist who had no pre-existent biases would identify as a religious faith. We don't use the word religion, but it is a faith. And that is the idea that, for example, I'm going to use a phrase that we're all so used to, but really break it down. America needs to come to terms with racism. Okay. What terms? What does that mean? Come to terms. What would the situation be if America came to those terms?
Now, this is where we get into, in a sense, Peterson's complex dynamic between belief and action. And so McWhorter is saying, well, people, they have a feeling of atonement. They have a belief because they use these certain words that their inner racist is atoned for, but the actions, there's no action there. It's idle, as he'll say. I-D-L-E instead of I-D-O-L.
Let's imagine the America that we're all about to walk back into after this seminar. This is an America where America has come to terms. What? Is it about something that would be written? Is it about conversations that would be had? What are the terms? One imagines a certain musical soundtrack, but that's a movie. What are the terms? It has no meaning at all that America would come to terms. Does it mean reparations for slavery? Because we've talked about that and nothing comes of it, and yet we keep talking about the coming to terms. It means nothing. What it means is that educated whites now consider it a mark of being morally advanced to acknowledge their inner racists. And the idea is that at some point, America will come to terms with that racism. But what are the terms? That has no meaning except as an analogy to Christian theological conceptions. It's about a judgment day. It's about this time when all of a sudden something happens where white people are absolved of their inner racism, and then we move on. But obviously, in terms of the lives that we're leading, walking around with our bottles of water, that has no meaning at all. And so, that's not activism. To be a white person and to think, I am racist, I have white privilege, I'm going to acknowledge this all the time, does nothing for the black people that Glenn was just talking about. It's something that's inwardly directed. It's very humane, it's well-intended, but it has nothing to do with anything that Dr. King was talking about. It has nothing to do with anything that the civil rights movement was about. It's an inwardly turned and, frankly, idle matter. I have not written about this because I think it would be mean to the people who convene Aspen, but I'll say it here, that I was at Aspen in 2017, and various things were discussed at Aspen. It was a very smart event. All sorts of brilliance was going on at Aspen. But, of course, at one point in the middle, there was this event that was about racism in the 21st century. Okay, so racism in the 21st century. Now, the question would be, given all the other events, what were we going to learn at this event? What was the new thing? But there was nothing to learn. I went to this thinking to myself, I shouldn't go, but I'm black and I'm at Aspen and there aren't that many black people. I should go. And I'm going to learn about, the racism here at Aspen. So I went. The food was spectacular. Now, it was run by one of my favorite black commentators. I'm not going to name who she was, but I really wish they had not wasted her time doing this. And there were 3 panelists. And everybody who was black at Aspen went to it, and a lot of the white people as well. This event had no substance whatsoever. It was church. It was literally church. No one would have used the word church, but there was this church service in the middle of Aspen. So, an eminent black foundation director, who I will not name, talked about how when he was coming up in the business, he would not wear casual clothes on Casual Friday where he worked because he thought that it wouldn't be good for a black person to do that. And everybody clapped. That was considered very funny. Then a middle-aged, I know I'm middle-aged too, a middle-aged white man talked about how he has a coach to teach him about white privilege every week. Somebody comes to his house every week and teaches him that he's privileged as a white person. And everybody clapped. In other words, he has a pastor. And then everybody left, and everybody talked about how wonderful this event had been. Nobody learned anything. That event served for white people at Aspen to atone for being racist, and everybody went off and actually learned things. It was a church service. That is the way things are now. Every third story on Slate is a church service. Every third story at NPR is a church service. It really doesn't help anything. To acknowledge that racism is something more abstract than cross burnings on lawns is one thing. To walk around thinking of it as a permanent stain that you must always atone for and never really will until America, quote unquote, comes to terms with racism is fiction. It is something as benighted and idle as something that we might see in an unlettered tribe and find curious. That is the white problem.
And then he goes into it. And again, the whole video is terrific, and it's well worth watching. But here again, religion smuggling. And the point is, we can't. The book of Ecclesiastes says we have eternity in our hearts. Well, what does that mean? It means that we live in the now. We live in the secular. That's what's below. We can't live without the ideal, without the eternal. And when we try to, what we do in our hearts is we do make idols. And we make them because we need them, and we set them up. And when, as God prohibits in the second commandment, we make an idol of things that are below, we wind up in these terrible moments like Owen Benjamin of our idols betray us. They let us down because they cannot hold the weight. They cannot carry the freight. They cannot do what our hearts need them to do. And so this is why we make them, and this is why they fail us. And we're always negotiating between the now and the ideal, or the now and the eternal. And actually yesterday in my Sunday school class, you can find, again, I do my church videos on a different channel. So you can find all my Sunday school classes going back a year or so. Now my silly dog wants to go back into the house. Yeah, my dog has me well trained. You need the ideal, or the, again, my Sunday school class, going back a year or so, my Sunday school classes are online. You need the ideal or the eternal to navigate and negotiate emotionally in the now. You can't do without it. This is why you always make an idol, because you have to make an ideal. You have to make something eternal. It's simply a function of how we are and what we need. We're made for this. Now, you can argue that two ways. One way you can argue and say, well, it's just a function of how we are. It's a function of our big brains, and therefore we must do it. Or you can argue that, more like John Calvin in the Sensus Divinitatis, that in fact this is how we are made for a reason. You need the now to validate your assertions and beliefs in the ideal. And this is why the charge of hypocrisy. And they have to be in alignment. They have to be synced. They have to be coordinated and together. Your life is, something weird's going on with my video or my camera. Your life is too small, and you live too short a time. You aren't smart enough, and you can't know enough to do this on your own. I better keep going because I don't know what's happening with the software. The contemporary challenge is belief. Your elephant is a herd animal. You believe in community. Again, Alan Jacobs in How to Think makes this point. Nobody thinks for themselves. They believe in community. We all believe in community. We can't help but believe in community. That's a function of how we are. The elephant beneath is a herd animal. Radical skepticism inhabits our community. This is a function of pluralism. This is a function of rapid change and dislocation that we've been seeing in the modern period. The problem is, and this is something I'm indebted to Jordan Peterson for helping me realize, we live within 3 generations at least. When we're talking cultural change, these things really happen over at least 3 generations. And again, our little lifetimes are too short to actually leave us smart enough to deal with this. You are going to be religious one way or another, even Sam Harris or Matt Dillahunty. Consciously or unconsciously, informed or uninformed, you may inherit a great system or you may not. And that, again, is whether you inherit good DNA, whether you inherit strong genes, the time and place that you're born, whether you're born to money or you're born to poverty. There's no equality in this. We all land in this story in one place or another. And you may have received by your parents a well-formed religious story that actually equips you to function well emotionally. And again, one of the factors of, we'll see if this is doing it on this level. Yeah, it is. Well, that's interesting. We'll see if it shows up in the video. seems to be rising at some point. It's going to consume me. I have to keep going. Looks like a video function. I just updated my driver, and maybe my video driver isn't very good. But, where was I? See, I distracted myself. We've all inherited a system, and Sam Harris keeps pounding the idea that, well, people are just working out with their parents, what they've inherited from their parents. But we all inherit this system, and how good or bad this system is really gets manifest in the whole person, in ourselves emotionally, in ourselves physically. And this, again, is where I get into, again, from Peterson, the idea that reality is true at multiple layers at a time. So it's got to work emotionally, and it's got to work physically, and it's got to work in terms of ideology, and the whole universe has to cohere and have integrity in that. And a good culture helps people succeed beyond the wisdom they can accumulate in their short lifetimes. Let me read that again. A good culture helps people succeed beyond the wisdom they can accumulate in their short lifetimes. That's what we should be giving to our children and successive generations. That's what we should be molding and shaping. Now, here's the question. How do you steward your religious self? Because you have one. You're always going to have one. Well, do you want ballast for stability? Do you want wisdom to make the best decisions you can? Do you want gravitas and honesty to deal emotionally with your failures and your legitimate reasons for shame? We all fail. And again, what I appreciated about Owen Benjamin's videos is he's grappling with this. And, well, why are you grappling with this on YouTube? Well, I think part of how YouTube is functioning is that in our dislocated society where we no longer live with each other or are an alien to each other, where we no longer have communities where, as churches have practiced in the past, where we are always recalibrating our orientations by being with one another. That's one of the reasons we need each other. We're always having to recalibrate ourselves, and this is why we always think in community. Well, this is what's happening on YouTube. We're now using this electronic medium. It's second class, it's second rate, but we're using this to recalibrate each other. And so we're learning from each other, and not just in terms of our conscious minds, but our broader minds. We're watching each other and we're learning from each other and we're influencing each other. And how do you steward your religious self? Well, you do it intentionally and unintentionally, but the question is, do you, the you that you think you are, the you that is your storied self, the you that is your soul, the you that you imagine has some agency, are you going to employ that agency to steward your religious self? And therefore, not only you, but the people within your influence circles and the people down through history, your children and your children's children, to the third and fourth generation, as the Ten Commandments said. Do you want gravitas and honesty to deal emotionally with your failures? And then, can you be forgiven? The now and the eternal, the story is your natural language. And this is why religions are embedded in stories, and why stories convey and stories communicate and stories are powerful. It's not just rhetoric, as Sam Harris wishes to consign it. It's far deeper than that. Your story arc will need to engage both ends, and that's what story can do. The Christian story engages the now and the eternal, the now and the ideal, and wraps it into one story. And the reason the continuity of that story is so important and so powerful is because we need that continuity to have the integrity so that, in fact, we can negotiate all of these things. And again, getting back to the video that I started with, this is what Owen Benjamin is doing in his video. He is negotiating, he is working out, he is kicking over his Jordan Peterson idol, which is why he's cussing at it, and he's appealing to an ideal that is beyond Jordan Peterson, and he's trying to establish himself as the true disciple. He, in a sense, has idealized and created an abstract of Jordan Peterson's teaching and set that up, and therefore is trying to appeal to that, even that as his hero or his idol, Jordan Peterson, has failed. But you need a community where your story is shared and curated. Because again, that's how it becomes real. That's how it becomes powerful. That's how it becomes permanent. That's how it gets connected with the eternal. And you need a herd to travel from now into eternity with. I did 2 funerals last week. was it last week? I had 2 classes meetings last week. I did 2 funeral meetings the week before. So I've been busy. That's part of what's affected my schedule. But funerals, and again, I've said this a number of times, as a pastor, funerals are some of the most important things that I do, because what are we doing? We are connecting the now with the eternal. We are connecting the now with the ideal. And what I do in a eulogy in my funerals is I am doing that negotiation for the community. And as I'm doing it, the people, if I'm doing my job well, the people listening are anticipating their own funerals, and they're anticipating, how will my life be summarized in a 20-minute talk by this pastor? I want it to be a good talk. I want my life to have been a good story. I want it to bless my children. I want it to bless the world. And I want it to continue into the eternal and the ideal. So, yeah, a lot of, watching Owen Benjamin's video and watching him process this tweet. And I think, again, Owen Benjamin is in some ways he's one element of a broader community, and judged by the reaction in the Jordan Peterson community by that tweet. This is life. This is religion. This is how we navigate. This is how we figure it out. This is how we travel together. And so just, I didn't listen to actually even this whole video. I probably will. But the now and the eternal have to connect. And they are going to connect, and you are going to connect them. The only question will be, is this agent that you imagine yourself to be, this storied creature, this soul, this man in the machine, this embodied self, are you going to have agency in this? Are you going to challenge the idols that have grown up within your heart? And do you have the resources and the community to actually deal successfully with them? That's the question in this moment of Jordan Peterson's tweet.